Good afternoon to everybody. Welcome to this eagerly anticipated keynote address. I'm Brady Dugan, CEO of Credit Suisse. It is a great honor to introduce our speaker this afternoon, Shinzo Abe, who was Prime Minister of Japan between 2006 and 2007. Of course, as you all know, a year ago, Japan suffered a terrible natural disaster caused by a massive earthquake, a devastating tsunami, and a nuclear leak at the Fukushima power plant. The resilience that the Japanese people have shown since the disaster has been nothing short of remarkable and an inspiration to people around the world. And while the impact of the earthquake was devastating, it has also provided opportunities for policymakers to implement measures that can help to revive the Japanese economy. We look forward to the former Prime Minister's comments regarding the progress since last year, and we're all heartened that there are hints that Japan is beginning to show signs of growth and recovery. It is rare to find expert, knowledgeable perspectives on the real outlook for the world's third largest economy, even more rare to receive these from a former leader of the country. That's why it's such a privilege to have former Prime Minister Abe with us today. He is ideally positioned to discuss the challenges Japan faces, for example, public indebtedness and rising social welfare costs, as well as the opportunities. Japan has not only shown its resilience since the natural disaster of last year, but remains still one of the most technologically innovative countries on earth. Former Prime Minister Abe was Japan's youngest Prime Minister for more than 50 years and won plaudits for improving relations with China and for his firm stance on North Korea. His time as Prime Minister was the pinnacle of a distinguished political career, which began when he was elected to the 1st District of Yamaguchi Prefecture in 1993, receiving the highest number of votes in any election in the prefecture's history. He was later appointed to the House of Representatives Committee on Foreign Affairs and served as director of the Liberal Democratic Party's Social Affairs Division, where he focused on the pension and Social Security systems. From 2005 to 2006, former Prime Minister Abe served as the Chief Cabinet Secretary in the Koizumi cabinets, after which he was appointed Secretary General of the LDP. With his experience leading one of the world's biggest economies, his insights are invaluable to us all, as many of the issues faced by Japan are also pressing questions for the world as a whole, where aging populations and mounting government debts are common. Before handing over to former Prime Minister Abe, it's also my great pleasure to welcome the Right Honorable Sir John Major, former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and Special Advisor to Credit Suisse, who will be moderating questions after former Prime Minister Abe has concluded his remarks. Abe-san, the floor is yours.
Well, hello, everybody. My name is Shinzo Abe. I would like to express my appreciation for inviting me today. And my appreciation goes to Credit Suisse for inviting me. It's also my great pleasure to meet distinguished guests from various countries here today. I was invited to this conference, as was introduced last year as well, but unfortunately had to make a decision not to come. On March 11, 2 weeks before the conference, the earthquake, the size of magnitude 9.0, hit Japan. The largest tsunami surge following the earthquake went 40 meters high at one point and deprived many valued people of their precious lives. The number of people who were either found dead or still unaccounted for amounts to close to 20,000. Tsunami surges also disrupted electric power facilities in Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power station, which fell into critical situations, as you are all aware. March 11, 2011 became an unforgettable day for the Japanese who are alive today. And while Japan was hit by the earthquake and tsunami as huge as unseen in our history, we also received very heartfelt words and support from Hong Kong and all around the world. Please allow me to take this opportunity to again appreciate my deepest appreciation for all of you and for the world. Throughout this unfortunate event, we, the Japanese, have truly learned the importance of support. We have learned that it is your friendship that gave us courage, and we could stay strong. Now, we, the Japanese, must keep the sense of appreciation in our mind and put all our efforts into the world peace and stability now more than ever before. Exactly 1 year has passed since the earthquake. It is about time for us to send out our messages to the world, especially to the people in Asia, about how the new Japan should be. And today, as a former Prime Minister of Japan, I would like to touch upon my thoughts on the future of Asia and Japan. Before going into that subject, I should like to mention something. Whenever I get an invitation to a global conference like this, I always try to stay on broader perspective, irrespective of my party affiliation. Having said that, I am an incumbent Diet member. And my party, Liberal Democratic Party, or LDP, is at present an opposition party. Naturally, there are many things I want to argue about the current administration. Of course, I have no intention of exposing partisan issues at a global conference like this, but I may sound critical of the current administration just as I do in Japan. So if that's the case, please excuse me. Today, Asia is showing the most remarkable growth in the world. The euro-related issues recently is casting a shadow over Asian economy, but in the long perspective, Asian nations shall continue to keep their high growth. According to the Japanese government, total GDP of China and the Asian countries excluding Japan is forecast to represent approximately 35% of the world GDP by year 2030. China already got ahead of Japan in 2010, and now it's the world's second largest economy. At the same time, we can also see that other countries of Asia are showing double-digit economic growth. For example, from year 2000 to 2010, the annual average nominal GDP growth rate of Indonesia was 15.7%, that of India was 13.9%, and that of Vietnam 13%. For Japan, the development of Asian economy is quite important. In 2010, Japan's exports to Asia increased by almost 30%, which means the amount exceeded 10 trillion yen or $120 billion for the first time. So it is not too much to say that for the recovery of Japan's economy, sustainable development of Asia is indispensable. Now, what's necessary for the sustainable development of Asia? I think there is only one key, and the key is to maintain regional peace and stability. Should this key be lost, Asia shall face difficulty to sustain prosperity for a long time. So in that regard, today I'd like to talk about my views on issues regarding poverty and disparity in Asia, as those issues seem to be often overlooked behind economic development. Behind the economic development, income disparity is becoming increasingly serious in Asian countries. 2 years ago, a government-affiliated think tank in China said that the income gap between urban areas and the rural parts became more than triple-fold. But last year, Bloomberg showed another China expert view that the gap between the highest net worth in urban areas and the lowest net worth in rural parts is at least 20 times, or some people even say more than 60 times. Income gaps among countries are also serious. In the comparison of per capita GDP of ASEAN nations, the highest per capita GDP were generated by countries including Singapore and Brunei, and the lowest by countries including Cambodia and Myanmar, and the gap is almost 60 times. The poverty brings about social anxiety, which eventually could lead to could shake the politics of the national level. So such social uncertainty is a seed of regional conflicts and acts of terror. We must not leave those issues intact. In January this year, I visited Myanmar and had to talk with President Thein Sein. In Myanmar, democratization is accelerating more than ever before, as represented by the release of Ms. Aung San Suu Kyi from a long time of house arrest. In the meantime, however, Myanmar, as a country, is also facing serious poverty issues. My recent visit to Myanmar brought home again to me the necessity to support democratization now taking place in the world. Japan must work for poverty countermeasures and income gap correction in those countries. In the meantime, Myanmar deserves to be regarded by the international community for its effort for democratization. I consider that the conditions for lifting sanctions are all set. For a country like Myanmar, infrastructure development by means of conventional ODA and assistance with its focus on solving regional poverty are necessary. For that part, in 2000, when Liberal Democratic Party was the ruling party, Japanese government set up Japan Social Development Fund, or JSDF, in the World Bank. What's unique about it is the programs implemented by this fund are initiated by local governments, local community, or NGOs. It means the fund helps the local people stand on their own feet and support one another so that the local community can get vitalized on a longer basis. On the other words, the program is grassroots. I consider that Japan's approach of providing support from the long-term viewpoint and from the recipient standpoint is something needed in Asia. Poverty is not the sole issue which prevents Asia from sustainable development. Security threats also requires our cooperation. Asian nations are modernizing armaments in recent years. It is natural that every country has minimally required armed forces for its own safety, but it must not be a threat to other nations. For example, nuclear armament, proliferation, and missile development by North Korea are posing a threat not only to Asia but to the entire world. On February 29th, North Korea announced temporary suspension of enriching uranium. The thing is, however, that country has received aids many times from others in a similar manner in the past, but it has repeatedly betrayed them. Countries concerned should be keen when responding to that country's request not to be baffled by DPRK again. In fact, North Korea mentioned the ballistic missile launch, which of course goes against U.S.-North Korea talks. Should North push ahead, the international community must take a determined attitude. According to the recognition of our government, at least, DPRK has abducted 17 Japanese citizens, and 12 of them are still in that country. A study by a private organization suggests that the larger number of people have been abducted. Unless this problem makes a step further towards solution, Japan will not provide aid or mitigate the sanctions on that country. This principle must not be discarded. I would like to ask the countries in this region to cooperate with Japan in solving this abduction issue. Especially, expectation is pinned on the role played by China. China has overwhelming power of influence over and interest with North Korea. According to a South Korean government-affiliated organization, more than 80% of North Korea trade value in 2010 was to China. It is my humble but strong hope that China shall utilize such a power of influence for regional peace, stability, and justice. Last year, General Secretary of Korean Workers' Party Kim Jong-il passed away, and his third son, Kim Jong-un, just assumed the position of the highest authority. This young and less experienced leader shall not guide that country to the wrong direction, so China's role is extremely important. China is one of the regional leaders, and its political, economic, and military behaviors are drawing attentions of other nations. However, in recent years, other countries' sentiments against China seems to be aggravating. The same can be said for Japan. China makes an exorbitant demand about our Senkaku Islands. China's Liberation Army Navy conducts activities in South China Sea. and the military spending mushroomed 20 times in the last 20 years. The military-related behaviors are causing great concern for other countries, which is quite regretful. Huge military power of China not only raises concerns among other countries, but also become an inhibitor of Chinese economic growth someday. As China's economic growth benefits Asia and the world, I truly hope that China would not take actions as a message, as if to say, military power draws the national boundary. I hope China behaves as a responsible power. In September 2006, right after my inauguration as Prime Minister, I chose China as the first destination to visit. Japan and China then agreed to construct a strategically reciprocal relationship. Both Japan and China are regional powers. By working together, the two nations shall be able to greatly contribute to the regional peace and stability in Asia. And I consider that is the shared aspiration of all countries in this area. Now, I would like to talk about my views on Japan from now on. When we look into the world history, we find quite many cases in which destiny of a nation is determined by a large-scale natural disaster. Immediately after the Eastern Japan Great Earthquake of last year, the pessimism was widespread, out of fear that Japan may lose its position as an economic power due to the disaster. But even since that time, I have believed that with such a keen sense of morale and the strong mentality of the Japanese, Japan will definitely make a recovery. I am very proud of the Japanese citizen who kept an orderly behavior even amidst such a disaster. People in the damaged areas missed and lost their relatives, friends, their houses, and even jobs. They're in evacuation and still caring for one another. By watching them, I came to recognize again that mentality, resilience, and the underlying strength which Japan has cultivated is still remaining firmly rooted. Following the earthquake, the accident at nuclear power plants became a grave issue, standing in front of the citizen. Under such circumstances, anyone could fall into panic. And the citizen was greatly impressed by those from the self-defense forces, fire departments, police, and the local government offices who dedicated themselves to bring the end to the nuclear power plant issue. They were determined to prevent the catastrophe from happening, even though they knew that they may be exposed to radiation. Their dedication was a ray of light in the tragic disaster. I feel truly encouraged by them, and I'm confident that as long as such a mentality is there, Japan will still recover.
In addition to such mentality, Japan, after all, has strong economic foundation. There's no doubt that Japanese economy has been in a slump. However, this slump is mainly due to policy failures by the government. I believe once the government changes its policy, Japanese economy would definitely revive. Japanese government should quickly lead the economy to get out of the deflation and also need to correct excessive appreciation of the yen. Economy of Japan has been in a serious deflation even since way before the East Japan Grand Earthquake. Japan's nominal GDP today is almost the same as that of 1990. In other words, had dropped to the level of over 20 years ago. Needless to say, national income has dropped. In the last 20 years, average annual income of workers in private companies in Japan was peaked in 1997. However, that has been dropped over 10%. Exchange rate recently has come back above 80 yen to the dollar. However, yen is still very strong. In order to resolve the deflation and yen appreciation, we need bold monetary easing policy like what the US, EU, China, and Korea did after the Lehman shock. For an example, the United States tripled its monetary base after the Lehman shock. On the other hand, Japan increased its monetary base only about 20%. No wonder yen gets stronger and deflation never stops. I am not at all saying we should promote competition and currency depreciation at global scale. However, at least in last 5 years, yen has remained much stronger against almost all other currencies. This needs to be fixed. Therefore, I have been appealing for introduction of bold monetary easing policy in coordination of the government and Bank of Japan, and especially proposing clear inflation target setting. Maybe they heard me, and the BOJ finally announced new monetary easing policy with inflation target of 1% last month. This helps yen to get weakened and the stock market is on recovery track. However, I should say this is not enough. Bank of Japan needs to raise its inflation target to 2% and increase its buyback of Japanese government bonds further. In tandem with that, the government needs to generate demands with necessary public works. Japan tends to become too cautious about setting inflation target or monetary base expansion with issuance of additional government bonds. Experts who are against the monetary easing policy claims financial discipline will be lost and the JGB might plunge or sharp inflation might occur, but they are extreme cases. It is true that government debt in Japan, both national and local, have been approaching to 1,000 trillion yen, which is double of GDP, so fiscal reform is imperative. Because of that, we first need to raise nominal GDP growth rate, put economy back on track, and increase tax revenue significantly. Some experts point out that a 1% improvement of a nominal GDP growth rate would lead to 3% tax revenue increase. What we need to be wary about is deflationary spiral, and hyperinflation would not be almost impossible to happen with inflation target of only 2%. The reason I claim this is my own experience. In 2003, under the Koizumi administration, Japanese government's primary balance was 28 trillion yen in deficit. I succeeded the cabinet, and my administration successfully reduced the deficit to 6 trillion yen. Japanese economy was on steady recovery track. Nikkei stock average hit 18,300 yen in February 2007, and this is still the highest record in 21st century. I'm sorry, but under the Democratic Party, stock price now is about half of that. And even though my administration did not raise taxes at all, but tax revenue in 2007 reached 51 trillion yen, which is record in past 10 years. However, the tax revenue in last year dropped to mere 40 trillion yen. Also, average exchange rate in my tenure was 190 yen to the dollar. But under Democratic Party cabinet since 2009, it was 91 yen in Hatoyama administration, 83 yen in Kan, and 77 yen with Prime Minister Noda. So, they not only leave appreciated yen as it is, but they worsen it. This is just hypothesis, but if we assume BOJ sets an inflation target of 2% and maintain nominal GDP growth rate around 4% in last 20 years, our nation's nominal GDP might have reached to 1,000 trillion yen or $12 trillion. This is not impossible figures to achieve. Government and the Bank of Japan needs to work together and send out clear message of bold monetary easing policy. With that, public and market would have good expectation of inflation and depreciated yen. Economy would be vitalized and Japan could be coming back on growth track again. Next, let me explain my idea about ideal growth strategy of Japan. I have been appealing for two keywords, innovation and open, since my tenure as Prime Minister. These two words are the key for Japan's growth strategy. Japan has high education standard and technology standard that support innovation. Nations in Asia has been enhancing their technical skills in recent years. However, Japanese companies have been still in advantageous position in many fields. While I was serving as Prime Minister, I compiled a long-term strategy called Innovation 25. At that time, development of advanced technology was not the only thing I focused. My biggest interest was to connect innovative idea to new business, realize society in which everyone can spend rich and fulfilling life. That means innovation of idea. This belief has never been changed. Also, with the keyword open, I specifically emphasized on promotion of free trade. And here, once again, innovation of idea, which is free from traditional mindset, is extremely important. Japan is currently facing with serious problem of declining population. Japan's birth rate is very low at 1.39, and according to a prediction, the population of Japan is to be 100 million in 2050 from current 128 million. Furthermore, productive population, or ages between 16 and 64, peaked out in 1995 and have been declining in over the last 15 years. The population is estimated to have dropped by 6.3 million. This is almost equivalent with total population of Hong Kong, which is about 7 million. On the other hand, population in all over Asia has been increasing. China 1.3 billion, India 1.2 billion, and 600 million in 10 ASEAN countries. Japanese companies need to take this huge, productive and consuming population more aggressively. With this understanding, I have been supporting expansion of free trade. Therefore, I think it is all right for us to positively consider Japan's participation into Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, which has been promoted by the United States or Australia. On the other hand, I have an anxiety. Negotiation of TPP would be extremely tough. Under the circumstances, establishing win-win relationship while protecting national interest of Japan at the same time is totally dependent to government's negotiation skill. But in last couple of years, the Democratic Party administration has been repeating mistakes one after another in diplomatic negotiations. I really doubt we can let them handle this very important trade negotiation with which future of Japan is at stake. This is also one of the reasons I think we should win back the administration as quickly as possible. This belief is becoming stronger day by day. Opinion about the participation in TPP has divided Japan. For example, those who are against the TPP claim that Japan's agriculture will be hit devastatingly. But is this true? Noda administration seems to be thinking about large amount of aid to farmers to convince them to accept the idea, but I rather think we should look for our chance in strategic exports of agricultural products. Some of you might get surprised, but Japan has been one of the major agricultural countries in terms of the value of agricultural product. In the statistics in 2005, Japan's agricultural production was ranked as number 5. However, its export has been extremely few. In 1965, exports of agricultural products from Japan was almost the same as Germany or the United Kingdom. But since then, export from Germany has increased 70 times larger and the UK over 20 times. There is no other reason, but Germany and the UK positioned agriculture as a strategic industry and implemented necessary policies. According to a survey of FAO, global agricultural trade has been increasing by over 10 trillion yen every year. Agriculture is one of the growing industry in the world. However, Japan only has 0.2% of share in this expanding market. With this in mind, I set a strategic target while I was serving as a Prime Minister. That was, as a start, to increase export of agricultural and fishery products to 1 trillion yen by 2013. I began with negotiation with the Chinese government and resumed export of rice from Japan to the country as it had been suspended by China. The rice shipped in those days was 20 times more expensive than ordinary rice in China, but they were very popular and sold out. As Asian nations are to be developed further, so-called middle-class population should increase. That means consumers who are willing to pay more for foods with better taste or safety should increase. This is where we have chances to expand our agricultural exports. Before I finish, I would like to say a few words about the democracy in Asia. As I mentioned earlier, I met with President Thein Sein in Myanmar in January. There was another purpose in the Myanmar trip. I had been involved with activities to help Asian countries to build schools with my colleague Diet members of LDP. Last year, the 11th school was opened in a town called Hindata, 5 hours by car from Yangon. To attend the opening ceremony of the school was another purpose of my Myanmar trip. Not only children, but also a number of people around the town gathered and welcomed us. I can still remember the bright smile of many of them. I strongly hope that children in Myanmar who study at this school will forge the future of new Myanmar, which has been more democratized than before. While I was serving as Prime Minister, my policy in diplomacy was based on 4 values that are freedom, democracy, basic human rights, and rule of law. This is not an exclusive policy to deal only with countries which share the same value with us. I prioritize to spread this value to wider areas than anything else. In this Myanmar visit, I reaffirmed the importance of such diplomacy. Asia is a diverse region in every aspect of religion, race, climate, history, and culture. It's great to have diversities. And I truly believe that by maintaining the diversity, we must realize society which not only creates wealth by economic growth, but the people can freely express opinions, representatives appointed by elections can make laws and protecting human rights or observing rules and are recognized as normal things to do. Thank you for your kind attention.
Well, Prime Minister, thank you very much for those excellent remarks, which I think we all enjoyed tremendously. When Brady introduced you a few moments ago, he mentioned the extraordinary catastrophe, almost beyond imagination, that struck your people and your country a year or so ago. I think in the intervening period, the whole world has watched with huge admiration the courage and the strength of the Japanese people as they tried to put their lives together after that catastrophe. We've watched them face intense tragedy and face it down with a generosity of spirit and without self-pity that is wholly admirable. And I'd just like to say before we turn to questions that I'm sure all of us here today attending this conference would wish to join me in expressing to you and the Japanese people our continuing admiration for your country's fortitude and courage. And we wish you and your nation every possible good fortune in the future as you continue to recover from all that you faced last year. Now, I'm sure after your remarkable speech a few moments ago, there are going to be lots of questions for you, but I'm going to be cheeky and steal the first one, if I may. One consequence of last year's crisis is an absolutely massive program of reconstruction in Japan, which I think is worth something in the region of 40 trillion yen. I wonder if you might comment on how much you think this program is going to push up growth and help Japan out of the cycle of deflation it's faced in recent years. And when you've answered that question, Prime Minister, I will invite questions from the floor.
Well, this time, following the disaster, the construction budget of 20 trillion yen was already allocated over the next 5 years. So 20 trillion yen spending for the reconstruction program over the next 5 years. when we look at the Japanese macro situation, Japan is still suffering from the deflational period. So challenges going forward, of course, includes, or the discussion point at the diet session is, first of all, about the social fair spending, like pensions and annuities. And to cover that, there is a discussion, a possibility of consumption tax hike. We, as an LDP, is also for the increasing the consumption tax, but this is for the increased amount of the tax revenue. But if under the deflational period, if we raise the tax, it does not necessarily lead to the better size of the tax revenue. So if the tax increase is now in discussion, then first we have to think about the recovery from the deflation. That will be very important. That is the reason why I also mentioned that the BOJ and the government has to work upon concluding the accord and then respond to the current situation.
Thank you very much. Right, questions from the floor, please. If you could indicate in the usual way, and a microphone will come and reach you. Who would like to begin? Yes, just here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister. I have one question in terms of the aging problems in Japan. As a lot of us know that the debt to GDP ratios in Japan is about 200% or more. With the aging problems in a population in Japan, what kind of risk do you see going forward in terms of the government handling this? Thank you.
高齢化はですね、当然、高齢化だけではなくて、少子高齢化という問題がありますが、当然、生産人口が減少していく、そして一方ですね、年金や医療や介護といった社会保障の給付は、老人に対する給付は増えていくという大きな課題が存在するわけでございまして。
So, therefore, in order to tackle this issue, so something we definitely need to do is to make economic growth and to generate the wealth. Other than that, we would not be able to handle this. And as I mentioned earlier, in the area of innovation, so we need to use talent and also the government fund to enhance the competitiveness and productiveness. So working population will reduce, but by enhancing productivity of each worker, so should be the measures so we need to aim. And of course, so including the social welfare expenses, cost, so we need to optimize our expenditure. So any government expenditure which is not really necessary, so we have to be courageous to cut those expenses.
Thank you very much. May I have the next question, please? Yes, over in the corner.
Well, it's a great pleasure to meet you. Thank you very much for your speech. Well, as one of the Japanese citizens, I am posing this question, but I feel a bit reluctant to pose you this question. There are a lot of challenges that the government has to overcome. There are a lot of things that Japan has to take as a country's initiatives. And under the current circumstances, a lot of people poses a concern about the leadership of Japan. We think that stable leadership is necessary. So about the stability of the leadership, how should we think as a Japanese? Well, about the stability of the leadership in Japan. In Japan, this is a biochemical. So as you know, we have the upper house and lower house, or the House of Representatives and the House of Councilors. Well, in Japan, we have those two houses working together for diet. And there is a regular attempt for the House of Representatives observing about 2 years and a half to serve, meaning that the election comes in every 1 year or 1 year and a half time period. So the change of power happens quite often, so that's quite hard to have a stable control of the power in this nation. So one thing that we can think of as an idea is, for example, to make a change in this biochemical system to make it into one house only instead of two houses. Just like in UK, that there is no solution of the house for at least 4 years after the election. And in that case, the maintenance of the control can be done. But in order to bring that new system, the constitution needs to be revised. And until that the revision is complete, for example, for argument's sake, we could, for example, change the timing of the election for those two houses. Right now, the timing is quite different because one is for 4 years, the other is for 6 years. So we could, let's say, have the election in every 3 years at the same timing. For example, they will be able to have the better and standard for having the change of control and the control maintenance. So, for example, this year, we might have a kind of a tentative or ad hoc election for electing a part of the House members, and we could do the rest for the remaining years. That could be another option.
Thank you very much indeed. Next question, please. Yes, just here.
Hi, good afternoon, Prime Minister Abe. We're an investment conference, so I thought I'd ask you some financial and investment questions. My question's to do with, does the government think about how to reinvigorate the capital markets and the stock markets? In particular, all of us here thinks there's a lot of potential and undervaluation in Japan, but there are some institutional features, such as cross-shareholdings, such as very difficult to create change that keeps foreigners away, for example. So my question is, does the government think about these topics as areas of priority? Thank you.
So, since Koizumi administration, including the cross-shareholding, so the government try to promote the globalization of the stock market. And one of the major goals for us was to invite investment from foreign countries. This is not only about the stocks, but basically speaking, Japanese people has been careful and cautious about investment from overseas. But being able to accept overseas investment, or so the Japan must become the country which can easily accept the investment from the overseas. So that was one of the goals. And under the Democratic Party administration, and Prime Minister Hatoyama or Prime Minister Kan, and tend to be a kind of a socialist. So the administration becomes kind of a socialist administration. But even in the Democratic Party administration, so Prime Minister Noda has different ideas in this area. And also, after the great earthquake, in order to grow Japanese economy, it is quite essential for Japanese economy to be highly valued from the global market. And as for the pension, so sustaining the pension system as Japan is aging and having fewer children, but so pension fund has been really using in the government policy. So the adjusting the stock market is a very important to correct the pension fund conditions.
Thank you very much. Next question, please. Yes, that table there.
Yeah, Prime Minister, thank you very much for the interesting comments. Without significant reform, how long do you believe the current regime in North Korea can last?
Well, it's quite hard to say, I have to say. Well, but when it comes to North Korean issue, well, let's say just for the argument's sake, that China probably regards that they're going to be in a hardship if the North Korean administration falls or goes into the disruption. Well, at the time of the President Luncheon, under the South Korea, they were also thinking about that they are going to be in a hard situation if the North Korea goes into a real tough situation. That's why they were providing some support on a continual basis. Well, the point is, if North Korea goes into disruption, or if North Korea goes into the real difficult situation, then the neighboring countries are going to also suffer, and North Korea probably knew it. That was the point. That is the reason why they demonstrated a very big bargaining power. So despite the fact that they were really facing a lot of challenges, they are still surviving. Having said that, when we look into what is happening today, their poverty situation is really severe. You know that the people are really leading a very serious lives. So there's just natural that their administration could collapse within the very short time period from today. But the current missile development or the abduction issues are still there, unsolved. And it is very important that North Korea understands that without the solution to those issues, they won't be able to continue the current situation, or they can't continue to survive. They have to understand that. And the international society has to let them understand that.
Thank you very much. We have time for one, possibly two, but certainly for one more question. Yes, at this table here.
There have been a lot of criticisms of the central bank for having run policies that have been very deflationary for Japan, and I know you've made some comments before about that. How do you influence change within the leadership of a central bank without affecting its independence so that you get what you want but don't hurt the independence of the central bank?
As for central bank, I think it is really important to secure the independency. But however, in many central banks, they work together with the government, and as for their policy target, objective, they share the same objective, but they use the different judgment and as being independent. But in case of Japan, so the law of the Bank of Japan only states the stability of the prices. And the administration's current goal of 1%, the Bank of Japan's current goal of the 1% inflation rate has not been shared with the government, but BOJ only holds the target. So in other countries like UK or US, so it is important to share the inflation target or price target between the government and the central bank. So I think by making changes, amending the Bank of Japan law, and so that the government and the BOJ can coordinate together, and in global market, so the central bank not only takes care of the price stability, but employment improvement is one of their responsibilities outside of Japan. So to the Central Bank of Japan, so we should add such roles and responsibilities. So we need to make an amendment to the roles of a Bank of Japan.
There's time for a very short question, if there is one, short and quick. Is there another question about? No, I think we're... Yep, there is. Okay. Short and sweet, please.
Mr. Prime Minister, how do you propose to work with the Chinese on the Senkaku Island? The natural resources, is it about natural resources or just the land itself? Thank you.
Well, that's a very stimulating kind of question. Thank you very much for that. Well, about the Senkaku Islands, this is the territorial issue, but the problem issue or the territorial definition, by definition, Senkaku Islands is within the territory of Japan. So, of course, there is not the government's intention that we share that land physically. For the international global standard point, by definition, that belongs to Japan. However, for the development of China, we of course understand that the China has to have a certain amount of energy. And setting aside the Senkaku Islands, in the Eastern China Sea area, Japan and China are having some discussions and disputing about the resources and the sources of the resources. And for here, I personally think that we have to work on the joint operation type of thing, having a cooperation in developing or finding those resources or the oil well kind of things. So setting aside the territorial issues of the Senkaku Islands, I think that we should work jointly together in cooperation to develop those resources issues in the East China Sea. Unfortunately, that negotiation of the development was something that China just drew back by themselves. So I hope that they will be able to reopen that negotiation as soon as possible.
Thank you very much. I think, Prime Minister, we've just proved again the first law of politics, that there's always one question too many. Prime Minister, I'd like, on behalf of all of us present, to thank you for an excellent presentation and the very frank and candid way you answered our questions. It's made for a very memorable session indeed, and one we'll long recall. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.